We are going to follow the money.
Everything you need to know can be understood with this simple phrase: follow the money. And believe me, that's what's happened.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money.
Welcome to College Sports Follow the Money, an all-new podcast diving into the critical issues surrounding the big business of college sports. I'm Andrew Monaco, joined by former president of Texas A&M University and former chancellor at the University of Missouri, Dr. Bowen Loftin, and former vice president and general manager of Fox Sports Southwest, Jon Heidtke. From NIL to the transfer portal and opt-outs, to the college football playoff, conference realignment, and more, we tackle the key issues facing college athletics today and into the future.
I need to feel you, Jerry! Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money! Show me the money! He's the loudest black man!
It is another edition of College Sports Follow the Money. It has been way too long since we have gotten together with Dr. Bowen Loftin, with Jon Heidtke. I'm Andrew Monaco. We thank you so much for joining us for this most recent edition. Let's see. I have been in Oxford, Mississippi, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, been in Columbia, South Carolina. Can either of you two top those cities?
No way.
Well, I was fortunate to spend a little time in Maui, so that was a beautiful spot. So I think I'll take the lead on that one. And I think I got you all some postcards and pineapples. So next time we all get together in person.
It's hard to beat fresh pineapple from Hawaii direct. I can assure you of that. I spent a lot of time at Pearl Harbor working with the Navy back in my research days. So a lot of time in Oahu, especially some time on the Big Island as well. My wife has ridden horses in the Parker Ranch on the Big Island, and she rides wherever we go. She's found every place we've ever gone to. She's found a horse somewhere.
But didn't Dr. Loftin, didn't I see you were wearing at the Derby? Was that most recently, or did that was
not a recent one. That was a picture that Jennifer Bohack took of me several years ago. I was at the Derby. I'd been in the Middle East. I'd been at Qatar at the A&M campus there, and I flew in. My wife was on a traveling Aggies trip in Lexington at the time with plans to go to the Derby, and I got in about 2 a.m. to Lexington Airport from Houston, and they lost my luggage. So I got to the hotel around 4, and I got 2 hours of sleep before we left on the bus to go to Louisville for the Derby day. And I had to borrow a pair of pants, actually, to be able to make it all work. So you realize the Derby is like the 12th race of the day, something like that. So after a long day in the sun, I was so tired, I fell asleep on my wife's shoulder. And Jennifer got that snap you saw online anyway.
No,
a great way to start.
That was one too many. I thought it was just one too many mint juleps. So that was just.
Well, I wish it had been that. I'm just exhausted from a long plane ride, 15-hour plane ride, and then having my luggage lost by United or American, whoever did it. On the way to Lexington was also the problem. It turned out my luggage went to Las Vegas. So.
And just before we get into our topics, our thanks to Dalton Hughes. He has moved on. He has been an absolute integral part of this podcast. Dalton has moved on. We wish him the best. I have a feeling we'll see him again. And I'm very proud to welcome Nick Savage as the producer of this podcast. Nick, welcome. We hope you stick around. We want to chase you off, that's for sure. Dr. Loftin, since we last talked, there has been movement. You have brought up to us time and again that what is this looming cloud over college athletics is the lawsuit. We are now getting closer to settling that lawsuit. Nothing's set, but in the time that we've been away, we've creeped closer to having at least an end point, and then the college sports world reacting to what this decision will be.
Well, the NCAA has oftentimes chosen to go to court as opposed to settling. I think they've learned their lesson by now. They've lost virtually every time they've gone to court. And those losses have come at a huge price to all of us, I think, in the sports world, not just financially, but simply in terms of how fans have been sort of hung out to dry sometimes because of how this has evolved. So this time around, there seems to be a movement. This suit was filed a little while back, but what seems to be happening as we make this recording today is a real effort to settle it out of court. And there's some very interesting twists to this. The lawsuit itself asks for $4 billion of back pay, basically, for NIL not paid in the past for college athletes. There's a talk of a $2.7 billion number being floated by the NCAA right now. This could not just go to the NCAA, it could also devolve to the conferences themselves, especially those conferences that are deemed to have money. The lead counsel on this, one of the lead counsels, is a guy named Kessler from Winston, and he is very much talking about a variety of things here. Some things that caught my attention were the idea that what happens in the future. So basically, he's saying that a player who's not yet in place could decide one day that they're not well enough compensated, not fairly compensated, and they could challenge this. So they want a formal process year by year going into the future indefinitely, whereby future players could challenge their compensation under this settlement. So let's say we decide to pay athletes $50,000 a year. Let's just say that number. Well, this guy could say, well, I'm the best quarterback they've ever had here. I deserve much more than that. I'm not being fairly compensated. We're going to go to a judge and have the judge make a decision on how fair my compensation is. Now, it sounds, perhaps it is, quote, fair, unquote, to do something like that. But think about the chaos we're talking about here. How many athletes could do this? On what basis? It just really boggles the mind what's coming out of this right now. But Kessler seems to be the driving force. People talk about him as the individual who's going to actually define the parameters of a large-scale settlement of both the House lawsuit and others that are related to it. And there's discussion right now very openly that it can be done this month, that the month of May 2024 could be the month that we resolve this particular lawsuit and those that are connected to it right now. So we may be on the cusp, guys, of a very big change what's going on. I mean, Jon, what do you think about this from the standpoint of how the flow of money from the TV folks is going to work to make this even possible?
Well, I would think the flow of money is a big part of this too, is that, again, I think once they start to allocate certain revenues to players, I think, again, or let's call it player compensation or athletic compensation, that's going to take a lot of pressure off donors right now, trying to feel out that their money's going to this nebulous process called NIL, which really should be PFP, pay for play. So I think, again, in your world, what you're talking about, that a star athlete, he can probably still make money off NIL as it was intended to do. But I think, again, if he's the star athlete, he's going to get a lot more probably endorsements that are out there than his fellow team players are. But if the number was already negotiated per sport or per what you were going to get, I mean, that would be your salary cap. And then just like the NFL, certain players, or the NBA, certain players can go out and do additional things in that space. So again, I think you're seeing more of a professionalization of the process. But I think, again, what this I think helps set a structure for is as that revenue starts to flow in, now that money can be allocated, to where it needs to go. So as usually all that revenue starts to flow through the conference, and then if those conferences determine what their, let's just call it, lack of a better term, salary caps are, they can put that money in that salary caps and plug that in, and that'll be what their athletic compensation number should look like. And then it's up to the schools. I mean, I think, again, they'll probably try to negotiate as much one size fits all for that, process as they can. If football players get X, basketball players get Y, Olympic sports get Z, they'll have that kind of figured out too. And then I think, again, at some point, I think then NIL truly what it was designed for could take effect, that a player that does have, the ability to generate more from in an environment where there are advertisements or other industries out there that really want to use them for their name, image, or likeness, I think they'll still be able to tack on additional revenue in that space, and then it'll be truly what it was intended to be, during that process. But I think, again, what this helps me, if I was a TV executive looking at this, I say that's a good thing because it just helps them kind of determine what their costs are going to be associated. And there's always something that anytime you run a business, if you have a good idea to do what your expenses are, it allows you to, do everything else that you need to do because you won't be getting hit or being worried about unexpected expenses popping up in this process. So I think, again, it's and I've seen read some things on it too, Doctor, about, again, they want to hold some of the NCAA distribution back as part of the revenue to kind of put in a save it for a rainy day fund and some of these other things. But I really have a hard time getting my arms around how you could be negotiating in the future on this and setting up parameters for that. Because I just, even again, having been around a lot of contracts, that would seem very hard for me to adjudicate at some point in time.
That's why I was surprised about that particular direction this guy is taking. Kessler is also recognizing that there's limits here. He basically says, leave the NCAA tournament alone. So leave it alone, put it out of the equation. So men's basketball, at least at one part of it, gets left like it is today to some extent. He also has been talking about how far down you go. He understands that there are certain conferences with lots of money and some with very little money. And so he's talking about a dollar figure on revenue by school. So, and the number bandied around right now in this conversation has been 100 million. So if your school revenues are over $100 million a year from athletics, then that would then trigger your responsibility to join with NCAA and make payments to recover past losses and go into the future. If you're under 100 million, different rules will apply. And so I do understand that. I know that there are going to be a lot of issues here. The question I want to ask you, Andrew, and you, John, both to think about is this. I've talked to some of the leadership in universities at board levels about this, and they're worried as can be about it. And their concern is that we're going to lose a lot of non-revenue sports, that when it gets down to getting to pay for play, that we're going to have to see things go away and become club sports as opposed to varsity sports. What do you guys think about that? Is that likely to happen? Is it going to be something that destroys a whole segment of college athletics that we've become fond of? I enjoy tennis and volleyball and all kinds of sports like that myself.
Is part of the irony of this suit, it is an Olympic sport athlete who started this suit?
Yes, it is.
What have we talked about time and again? Unintended consequences. Yeah, when Trev Alberts talked, when he was introduced to Texas A&M, this was one of the topics that he brought up about when you talk about the NCAA being sued. He said, the NCAA is us. He's speaking about every school. That's us that's going to have to pay for this. And I think it's going to be more than just monetarily, Dr. Loftin. And I think that's a shame because we're losing sight of student athletes through all of this. Back to John's point about the professionalization, if you want, of college athletics. And then you're missing a lot of opportunities of what student athletes get in whatever sport it is of the education and being part of a network and a family for that university. If that is an unintended consequence of all this, that's going to be, I think, the saddest consequence out of all of this. John, I don't think I'm not the sky is falling type thing, but this is where each step to here. It's funny, you talked about moving all the way around to get back to what NIL was intended for, because the NCAA kept their head in the sand. If they had said it was for name, image, and likeness, we could have, I'm not saying skipped it entirely, but we wouldn't have had this that we have to deal with. But that would be a very bad consequence if that's the case, because that's a lot of lives who are affected, not just performances on the field or the court or the pitch. That's lives that are affected if they no longer are going to college.
Yeah, I don't want to say the sky's falling either, but I certainly think this leads to a path of, if you're an athletic program and let's call it 100, 150 million, whatever that budget whatever that number is that puts you into this particular, category, is that, again, not to pick on tennis, but let's just say for tennis, for instance, I mean, you can still give scholarships, and maybe it's a club sport, and you can kind of maybe rewrite how the club sports go, and they go back to what the NCAA, amateur rules were designed to protect, and you kind of create that environment. But you look at, again, the programs that are revenue generators. I certainly think football, you got to pull out of that mix. and probably, men's basketball, and others are close. But I think, again, if you look at what we truly call Olympic sports, how do you keep, some schools are going to say it. Again, I think we've talked in this program about what Stanford does. They probably have the most Olympic sports programs out there. And when the first, this first wave hit, COVID hit, they said, hey, we're going to have to, close the doors on several of these sports. Their alumni rallied around, ponied up the money to, keep them at that level that they were at currently. And so I think that's some of it. But even at a club level, I still think the tennis will be pretty good. The track and field will be pretty good. You look around there, there's still, these athletes still need to go play somewhere. It's just a different dynamic now going to school versus what it was versus what the football model is going to look like going forward in this process. And I think anybody who is going to, any sane person out there would say, okay, we know football's got to be a different animal. Can we try to keep the NCAA or the amateurism aspect of what college athletics is all about for these Olympic sports in a way that football doesn't, necessarily, not say corrupts the right word, but professionalizes, so to speak. And how do you pull them out and then try to keep everything else kind of in that bucket? And again, NIL does help those other Olympic sports, particularly because that's really where I think you've seen the true, where NIL has truly worked, it's worked at those Olympic sports. Football, it's just been more of a PFP or play for play, way to kind of hide that process and use that as an opportunity to entice those student athletes to go to a particular school. But I do think, again, there's a club model there that, again, if done right, maybe even more sports gets to the club level. And again, some of that money is used to have a very robust program in those space. I mean, look at A&M. If you had a hockey program here in A&M, I think, again, that could be, club sport. They do very well. Lacrosse, boys lacrosse. I've had a couple of students who played a very high level of lacrosse. Matter of fact, one of the Aggie players a couple of years ago got drafted. Oh, no, it was rugby. Got drafted by the Major League Rugby Association, playing a club sport. So I think there are some interesting stories there that, again, that might support more of those types of things. And again, that could create more opportunities for fans to see those types of things if they were elevated. Their facilities were elevated a little bit. You've already got all these on campus. How do you retrofit them, do a few more of this stuff? So there could be a unique way where maybe some of these club sports get elevated, and still, again, I think fans would probably enjoy watching those sports as well.
Well, gentlemen, there are some sports like tennis, for example, we've already mentioned that have a very robust professional dimension to them. And so I can see a need to keep tennis very elevated at a college because there is a pipeline that goes from there into the pros, and big money is spent at that level. But there are some, like softball, that just don't have much of a professional world out there. I mean, you can play pro softball, but the pay is so minuscule that it almost doesn't matter. And so is that going to be the dividing point? Is there a pathway beyond a college sport to a professional dimension of that sport that's lucrative or not? Is that going to be the way we define these things?
I certainly think that's one. I mean, talking about women's sports right now, I think you just saw, if you guys have been following this, the WNBA just awarded another franchise. The Women's Professional Soccer League has awarded more franchises. The values of those franchises have gone up significantly in the last 18 months. So I think part of this women's renaissance, sports renaissance that we've seen could benefit some of these pro leagues. And I don't think a softball league is too far behind. There's a professional volleyball league that just saw that ESPN's televising some games on. So I think that content is going to continue to grow. And I think it certainly will create some, professional opportunities out there. Again, will they pay what Major League Baseball and the NBA and NFL? Probably not. But I think, again, if there's an athlete, particularly a female athlete, that wanted to pursue that, I think there will be some more opportunities in there because, again, in the world of content, live sports is still king. I mean, if you look at the women's basketball ratings and you look at women's soccer ratings, and I think, again, if you saw the softball ratings from a year ago, there's an audience for that. All right. And there'll be a league that will capture that and will do some interesting things. And again, as fans see players, from their schools, that they've started to follow and have developed a relationship there, I think it's only going to translate to a professional level if and when those things happen. So I think in a way there could be some pathways to that, but to your area, Dr. Loftin. What you talk about is that there will be some opportunities. I think that these leagues then, or these professional leagues, could work in tandem with the universities to create good programs, so it becomes a feeder for them for their sport. I mean, again, where would the NFL be today without college football?
Amen.
So, these other leagues could look at that too and say, we want to invest in this. We want to create some things here. We want to put coaching, whatever that model looks like. If it's putting coaches in or helping with facilities, or now there's again, let's just say A&M hosts a women professional softball team. All right. Again, that could be a great thing for Dale Diamond to be doing during the off season. Maybe put a few more people in there but who knows? I think there's opportunities there for these sports to potentially, find some additional creative homes there. And I think what's really held all that back is that the industry by and large has said, well, people don't watch that. There's no reason to do that because they just don't have the eyeballs. I think the world has turned upside down over the last 18 months on how women's sports has been perceived and how well it is doing in terms of television ratings and consumption on that aspect. So I think, again, would a softball league be too far behind? Probably not, but it'll take some creative people to kind of put a league like that together. But you're seeing it, again, all the time. I think there's 2 professional women's volleyball leagues out there right now. And again, where are they getting all their players? From top-ranked NCAA programs. So I think, again, that there's a pathway there. But again, these are the kinds of things that maybe, and we talk about the unintended consequences. This might be a way where there could be some benefits of that if people look into that and say, how do we grow this? How do we nurture this? And then create an opportunity there to put that into a professional level. And again, have these television relationships and partners there that will want to carry that content as part of their overall, distribution strategy.
Through all of the major conferences, we're thinking, okay, it's just going to be this breakaway. So it'll be the SEC and it'll be the Big Ten, it'll be the ACC, and it'll be the Big 12. There's haves and have-nots inside these conferences. So if we're making a delineation of 100 million or more in your athletic department, is it going to be if you're 99 million and lower, are you going to pay less for this suit? Like, are we going to see now a bit of a division in the conferences themselves?
I certainly think that would, when the dust settles on that, I think that would be part and parcel of these conversations. Because again, if you're in a conference of, let's just say if you're in the Big Ten and you're in the SEC right now, let's say that number is 150 million and you're below that, is that become a criteria for you to stay a member of that conference? Maybe. I certainly think that would certainly be up for discussion. So I do think there are going to be some interesting there. And that's why I don't think conference expansion is done by any stretch of the imagination or realignment there, because I think these things will probably all create other catalysts for conferences to look inside of their own membership. And are we all meeting the particular qualifications, or looking outside their current membership to see if there are others that could help them, bring them in and strengthen their collegiate, their properties there too, particularly in terms of, again, if the conferences are the ones that are leading the television negotiations on these processes. As a TV guy, and if that would be the league I'm working with, I would want them to get as stronger as they could be, because it's going to create more opportunities to generate more eyeballs.
Yeah, so within the SEC, John, there are certainly real divisions right now. I mean, Vanderbilt has historically subsidized their athletic program extensively because of their small stadium size for football, their lack of attendance, their lack of sponsorships and things like that. Oddly, this last year, 2 other SEC schools had to borrow money. Athletics had to borrow money from their school. It happened in Missouri. It happened at Texas A&M, actually. Where loans were made by the institution to athletics specifically to get them past a rough spot right now. And of course, A&M is getting up in the $200 million level of revenue, yet they still couldn't make ends meet. And we kind of know why that was in part. But my point is that nobody's really immune from this. I think that expansion is definitely still alive. There is a lawsuit, again, underway, or at least threatened by 2 ACC schools, at least, to eliminate their grant of rights or modify it somewhat. So both Clemson and Florida State have made it very clear that they're unhappy with the state of affairs in the ACC, and they're logical members of an SEC in the future. UNC Chapel Hill might go either way, to the Big Ten or the SEC. I could see them wanting to stay in the SEC or be in the SEC because of the culture and so on of that part of the country they're in. But there's a lot to be done yet in terms of expansion that's done in a way to coalesce, if you will, within maybe 2 conferences, the folks who are most going to be dealing with this issue of compensation derived from the House lawsuit and related lawsuits.
No,
John,
you're absolutely right.
What drove it in the past, right? Why Maryland and Rutgers went to the Big Ten. Maryland brought the DC market and Baltimore. Rutgers brought the New York market through the Yes Network, expanding Fox and the Big Ten Network, right? Maryland went because they were in debt, right? They were in debt. They had to make that move. Is it necessarily just market any longer in this? What I think I'm with Dr. Loftin, where I think the conferences shift again. And is it now just part of the reason why a school may go to a conference? Look, Clemson, South Carolina is not a huge market when we're looking at, you know what I mean? When we're talking about TV markets in that area. Florida State, if you think about it, is just Tallahassee, which isn't a big market, but some of Florida. Do we also now have to consider, can they afford making that move? The revenue that their athletic department, does all of that come into play now in the next shift in the conferences?
I think it does, Andrew. And I think, again, just to give the listeners sort of a look back, why when the Big Ten and all those schools were making moves back in the day, 7, 8, 10 years ago, was primarily driven by the media piece of it. If you were the Big Ten and Fox, and I was intimately involved with what those conversations were, you would charge more money to your cable bundle if you were in market, in the Big Ten territory than you were out of the market territory. So Fox's desire was to get Rutgers in, which brings New Jersey and New York in, two of your largest television market, Maryland, the DC market. So now all those television households, and we're on the cable bundle, we're paying, instead of 10 cents a subscriber for that, we're paying $2 a subscriber for that. So you can see where the value quickly accelerated through that process. When you added Texas and Missouri to the SEC, you added, I think, 5 top 100 markets: Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, St. Louis, Kansas City. All of those generated north of 16 to 20 million new television households that now went from paying 10 cents a cable subscriber to $2 a cable subscriber. So there was a lot of value 10 years ago to do that. Today, the issues are, as your cable bundle continues to erode, that market size isn't nearly as valuable as the brand name. All right. So now if you look at and say Clemson last year for the ACC, if you look at their television schedule, and again, I don't have it in front of me, but my guess was they probably had half a dozen of their games generate over 4 million viewers for that process. Let's just say that's the bench line, 4 million viewers. If you're bringing in 4 million viewers, to me as a television partner, that's a pretty salty number. And so now you look at that. Rutgers and Maryland, I doubt, had one game over 4 million last year, unless they played Ohio State or Michigan. Certainly not if they played each other. So Clemson, a Florida State, a North Carolina to a degree, those are brands now that are going to come out there that people will follow that brand. So I think, again, in the direct-to-consumer world, where customers are going to be able to kind of have a very customizable user experience and pay for those subscription services, I think the value is going to be in what brand do you bring to them in terms of how well do they play football. So I think that's going to probably become more. If I were doing my long-term strategy for Fox right now, and again, if you look at who they picked up when they added in the Big Ten, it wasn't Washington State and Oregon State. They went with the brands, Oregon and Washington, and USC and UCLA versus Cal and Stanford. Those are brands that, again, football fans have been used to seeing and have played at a high level. So those brands, I think, are going to be driving this conversation more so than television territory. Not that television is not important, but again, in the way the economics work today, I think brands are going to be more important to that television audience and that television or that video network distributor.
Well, there are two brand dimensions here I want to talk about. You've already mentioned one, which is basically fan recognition, interest in that sort of thing too, which is clear and very much translatable into who views and how many view. Got that. But I would point out to you, even though we think about the commissioners as being the people in charge, they do work for a board, okay? They work for the schools of their conference. Look at the Big Ten. There's only one school in the Big Ten, even in its expanded version today, that's not a member of the elite AAU from the standpoint of academic recognition. So I would argue that, especially in the Big Ten, that expansion is still going to be governed by who the school is, not from a fan viewpoint only, but also from an academic standing viewpoint. Nebraska is the oddball, but they were a member of the AAU when they joined the Big Ten. They got kicked out a couple of years later. And I was there when that all happened. So I know all about that particular chapter, shall we say. Less so in the SEC, but Can't speak for Greg Sankey, but certainly Mike Slide, as commissioner, really wanted to see the SEC's academic standing rise. And he did a lot to make that happen, including adding schools like Missouri and Texas A&M, who are members of the AAU. And the Big 12 lost, in a sense, those two schools, and they then had fewer AAU members than did the SEC. The SEC has never had a stellar academic reputation overall, but I think there's still interest in branding that. And I talked to Mike many times about UNC Chapel Hill, an AAU member that he thought would be a good partner within the SEC framework. It didn't happen in his time or my time, but I still think it's out there as a possibility. Clemson and Florida State don't bring that prestige with them exactly. Oddly, South Florida is now the other AAU member in Florida, not Florida State, who has wanted to be there, but has not gotten there yet and may never get there. I don't know the answer to that. But oddly, South Florida in Tampa is the one that made it into the AAU, not Florida State. And that's something to think about, too, as far as how this future develops. I don't see them as a athletic powerhouse. You may argue with that a little bit, but I don't see them in that context, really. But I would say you can't ignore the fact that, at least in the Big Ten, there is a real sense that we want to have the prestige of having mostly or all AAU members. The Pac was almost there, and the ones left behind are not. We're not AAU members. So that tells you something about the Big Ten picking certain schools and not other schools join them in their conference.
I don't want to burst your bubble, Dr. Loftin, but I doubt there was a clause in the Fox agreement with the Big Ten that says we're going to pay you more if these schools were AAU. So again,
but who votes? Who votes?
I see from a conference perspective, that's nice to have, and certainly as an academic and prestige standpoint. But I think in the new world that we're going forward, I don't think viewers care about that designation. That's probably maybe outdated and archaic in terms of what a conference's mission is. But based on what our mission is today, when you're seeing where the industry's gone, it's about making money. And I don't think that issue is going to, I don't think, again, all things being equal, I can see where that might play into it. But again, the only thing I can see really valuable for that is I used to watch as a kid, the old was at the GE College Bowl. It was kind of like Team Jeopardy. I would love to watch, A&M take on MIT in that world and those kinds of things. I think that would be fun. And again, who knows? That's probably a program out there it could be resurrected. Everything gets resurrected these days in the terms of television content. But again, your points are very valid, Doctor. But I just think, again, at the end of the day, the brands are going to, you said AAU is a good brand, and if you can marry with that, certainly looks really good in a press conference or clipping when you make that announcement. But at the end of the day, I don't think your television partners are going to care.
But Dr. Loftin, this is to your point. If the NCAA starts to fade away, commissioners, presidents, schools now make decisions, right? So there's going to be a part of that if there's no more NCAA going forward.
Well, the cultures I was talking about. I understand what John's saying. I don't disagree with you, John. I'm just pointing out that at least in the past, the AAU membership as a designator was something of great value to the Big Ten, of less value to anybody else except maybe the Pac. Pac's pretty well gone. Okay, that's over with. I would just remind you that the commissioners are selected and retained by a board comprised of the chancellors and presidents of the member institutions. Just don't forget that. And I've seen that firsthand. I've been on those boards, okay? And there is a lot talked about there. Money certainly is a driver, no doubt about it. And I think it'll be even more so down the road. But there is a reputational thing here too. That is not reputation with fans, reputation with peers. And that's a powerful force and has been a powerful force in the Big Ten. Less so in every other conference except for the Pac. With the Pac out of the way, maybe the Big Ten people throw their hands up and say, we can't fight this fight anymore. We won't worry about it. It'll be strictly based on TV viewership as far as who we add to or take from our mix. We mentioned a while ago, it may well be that the membership of these conferences changes both in a positive and negative way, that some universities are kicked out. Vanderbilt, AAU member. Are they going to be staying in or staying out of the SEC? Good question there. I can name a couple of Big Ten schools that are questionable, Nebraska being one of them, very high on the list for many reasons, not simply academic success or lack thereof, but also their position in the country. Where are they? What state are they in? What's their viewership? They were a dominant football program years ago. Have they been that way yet? Recently, not at all. So what's going to happen there? They may dominate volleyball, but will they be worth enough to a Big Ten down the road to maintain membership? I don't know.
Jon, in the world of college basketball, you were talking about when we get to March Madness, and usually in November, there's the Great Alaska Shootout has tradition, and Maui has tradition, and playing the Battle at Atlantis has tradition. Might be a new tradition coming up in Las Vegas, huh? The NIL is getting involved in a basketball tournament this November, isn't it?
It is. It'll be interesting to see how this all kind of translates out yet, but at least according to the headlines and the recent articles that have come out on it, it appears that some organizers in Vegas are putting an event together to play at one of obviously you've got a lot of different opportunities out there, but to bring a basketball tournament is where the catch is for the 8 participating teams, each team will get $1 million. That money will go directly into their NIL collective or to pay their players. So I think, again, it's going to be right now there's 7 teams that have basically signed up. Most of these you'll recognize all the names, Texas A&M as being one of them. And they're looking to get one other team in there. But it's been interesting to see now the number of folks that are willing to sign up for this deal. And I think one of the other interesting factors is I haven't seen it's got a television deal yet, but chances are this could be something a made for streamer type of event to do in Vegas. So I think, again, whoever the organizers are going to look at this opportunity. But it's interesting to see, again, that they have been very bold and not afraid to say, we're going to pay the participating teams this much money to come and play in this tournament. And again, it's been interesting to see the number of coaches who've raised their hands and say, we're in. So I think, again, if this thing gets successful, I think you might see more and more of these types of things, trying to percolate into that world where, basically these organizers are trying to make sure they have the best teams or potentially the best brands, theoretically, to come in and help them, make their money, through certainly to get that $1 million back, $8 million just in fees alone would be certainly through television revenue. And in fact, or that fans will come and be part of that thing because Vegas is, again, certainly very destination town. And again, can they get the casinos or the local industry there to help them prop this up and bring more of these types of marquee events to Vegas? So we've seen the Super Bowl there. We've seen other things there recently. So again, I think it's a unique and intriguing idea and very, open market oriented that's what they're trying to do to bring these teams in. So again, it seems very fascinating to me. It'll be interesting to see what the fine point is or the fine print is on all these different deals. But so far, again, it seems like the teams that have been invited are very bullish on this type of opportunity.
The student athletes as well will have the opportunity during their off days to make appearances or do charitable work, something like that.
Yeah.
That's also a component in this quote unquote tournament.
So who says, you're going to take different players and go to buy different casinos and meet people and do those types of things there too. So I think, again, that truly is probably, utilizing that NIL brand is if your team plays here, we want to make sure we're taking advantage of, doing maybe hosting something for the local alumni groups or the fans that have traveled in and create, additional revenue opportunities from an experiential standpoint. So again, I think this is one it's going to be fascinating to keep an eye on. But again, I think we'll probably see more of these than less of these going forward.
With more and more games in the Big Ten on Peacock, right? I'm going to tie this together, I promise. Netflix possibly getting the 2 Christmas games for the NFL. But back to what you just said about this tournament. If that is now a streaming opportunity for someone for this tournament, plus the brands, does that drive subscribers to say, I want to watch Team X play in this tournament? Again, with Peacock, the Big Ten deal for them, the streamer, Netflix jumping in, they all seem to watch Apple TV and Major League Baseball, or they all seem to watch Amazon with the Thursday night games. Jonica, is what you were saying about different players being a part of this, and that's also where some revenue, as opposed to just the big 3, big 4 networks.
Yeah. So as you look at it again, when you look at it through a television lens, or a content lens out there, you're seeing some value in this thing is again, that those rights are now technically unencumbered. All right. So they're not going through a conference. They're not part of any existing ESPN or Fox relationship. So basically an entity could come in there and bid on those rights. Let's say you're a streaming company. We talked about Peacock. They did the NFL playoff game this year. All right. The details haven't been completely fleshed out, but some of the data that I've seen there basically has said that of the 10 million people that signed up for that game, roughly 30% of those are still who are new customers for them through that process, are still watching Peacock today or part of that Peacock process. So what Peacock does is it's a subscription-based service. This becomes an acquisition, cost for you to bring in new customers. You do the NFL, it brings you that running. And if that 30% stays on over the course of time, there will be a window when the value of what they paid for the games will be exceeded by the revenue that they've generated by bringing in new customers into their economic model. So I think you will see more and more of these people doing that, like Ted Lasso for Apple. That was a great show, bought Apple a lot of deals. As soon as that was over, people started canceling Apple. All right. So if you're a streaming service now, what you've got to figure out is how do I reduce that churn? What programming provides enough stickiness that I'm going to keep customers in there for a long period of time versus just flopping back and forth to follow one hit show after another? Well, certainly live sports has the capability to do that. And we've seen them do that all over the years, going all the way back into the 60s when the NFL first started getting broadcast by the big three networks. People forget when I was working at ESPN way back in the day, we were probably a 20-cent service trying to barely get on all these cable systems. We got a 10-game package with the NFL. I had to go back and knock on all my cable operators' doors and say, we want to charge you another dime more to carry the NFL. But the NFL being on ESPN legitimized ESPN as a major player in sports. And today you can see the value of what ESPN has done for them. Fast forward 30 years to the future, you're looking at streamers now who don't have that kind of cachet in terms of being a sports provider. But if you're looking at them now starting dipping their toe, and we saw Peacock in, we've seen Apple in, we've seen YouTube get in with its Sunday ticket package. Now, if Netflix comes in and does these Christmas Day games, that's a huge move for them because Netflix today is considered the 600-pound gorilla in the streaming universe because there are over 200 million subscribers worldwide. And again, if they can now get them with the NFL and that helps them go from 200 to 230, 240, there's a value to them at the end of the day. Plus, that's content that can last, that goes throughout the season that becomes, it's a very, people love it because it doesn't want to make you churn out of watching your television shows there. So I see value in that. And I see this is what I think these streamers are looking at too. And I think, again, if I'm the organizers of this event, certainly you'd like to maybe get a couple of games on broadcast, maybe the championship game or whatever. But if you're doing other things, 8 teams playing, that's, I don't know, a dozen or so games when it's all said and done. And the content that you can create around it, like we're seeing it right now. ESPN just launched this week a series on the Final Four, the women's Final Four, about their version of Hard Knocks. So that's kind of content. F1, Formula, Drive to Survive. That type of content now become part of this, and you're following a team throughout the season, and this sort of starts their season. And again, if you're Netflix or whoever does it, you do a deal with some of these programs to follow them. What great content that it gives you for now another 3-4 months, leading all the way up to the NCAA championship. And if one of those teams is playing in the finals and you were doing that content, you've caught lightning in a bottle. So again, to me, as a content guy, I think that's a brilliant idea. And I think, again, there'll be content that people will want to follow. And if you're able to get those subscribers to stick on with that content, and then they find a show or a movie, or they get comfortable with that thing and they're unlikely to churn, that's a tremendous asset as part of your building business plan, because they're creating an annuity, theoretically, of these fans that may or may not churn out. And sports fans tend to have a lot more loyalty than maybe people who are hopping for the cheapest service and watching Ted Lasso or whatever show that it might be. So I think you'll see the streamers now start to look at live sports as an area to shore up their business and make their make their P&L statements look a little bit better, which is going to hopefully create, again, drive their stock prices over the course of time.
Well, John, will Netflix actually look at the viewership of these NFL games and use that as a measure of the potential it has if they were to have a continuing amount of content of that nature going forward? And would that then open up college sports down the road as one of those elements of content?
I think it certainly could. I mean, again, if I'm Netflix right there, one of the things you look about the streaming services that we've talked about is their ability to go global, international. You know, you don't have to have a satellite. You don't need, if you've got an internet stream, you can get this content. So if you're Netflix, think about it, and you got 200 million plus subscribers, and all of a sudden now the NFL you've got your relationship with the NFL, and you said, hey, let me be your global rights holder on that. And as the league works with you to grow global distribution in these other countries, that could be, and they don't have customers in those other countries because of whatever reason, could the NFL be a catalyst for them to look at that opportunity there? So again, they have much more detailed metrics than Nielsen does today. I mean, I used to just beat my head against the wall trying to figure out, we were letting Nielsen determine what we should do and how much we should pay people because they had a sample size of 150 people in a metroplex that had over 10 million viewers. You know, this was absurd. But that was the currency that we had to deal with. So in a world of streaming, you're going to know a lot more about who your customers are and what their viewing habits are, that you can create more content that's going to help them grow that business. So I could see, again, the Netflix, they still like to use the term they're dabbling. They haven't bought a league package like Apple did with the MLS. They didn't buy the Thursday night package that the NFL had that Amazon bought. But again, I think they're starting to see the value of sports and how does that fit in their ecosystem and where can sports help them continue to grow their business and create value for beachheads for them. Because at some point in time, there are going to be other people can create great movies or great shows, but there's only one league that can create the NFL. There's only so many people that can do, live TV sports. So again, there is going to be value in that space for these people. But again, taking a page out of history, if you go back and look at this is the late 70s, early 80s with cable television that we're now moving into, and all these different networks were launched on the back of sports. I mean, the Fox Broadcasting Network is here today because they snuck the NFL rights away from CBS back in the 90s. If they don't get that deal, nobody's heard of Fox Broadcasting. But again, the power of the NFL and live sports propelled them, it was certainly a lost leader for them at the time. But over time, the NFL has made Fox one of your most valuable, worldwide global brands.
And you can't binge a season, right? You can't binge it. You can't watch all 12 games in a season for football. You can't watch all 32. It's like the old days.
No. And go back to college sports. If you got all those brands now playing each other in the course of of the fall on the Saturdays, you've got a lot of great content that you're going to make sure viewers are tuning in every Saturday, allowing you to promote. Hey, we've got the next Ted Lasso show. Hey, we've got the next great whatever programming that it is. Because again, to use another page out of history, if you look at last year, roughly the 100 most watched events in the United States were 93 were NFL games, and again the 2 or 3 that weren't were programming that followed NFL or playoff games. So if you're launching a show, if you're CBS, they put Tracker on this year. Tracker's still pulling a number because most people got exposed to it who may not have got exposed to it because they kept their TV on and watched it after the Super Bowl. So there is value there about that tide, or that tide raising all boats in that harbor. And again, live sports allows you to do that.
And clearly, NFL has actually looked at very seriously non-U.S. venues. MLB is on the same thing. So you're seeing a small number of games played elsewhere. So there could be a taste, if you will, in Europe, for example, certainly Mexico, South America, for some of the sports we have in this country right now that may compete down there with soccer.
Yeah, it's funny. We're probably veering off course a little bit here, but I share the story with you what the NFL is trying to do. I bring in speakers before that talk about the Olympic movement and how strong the Olympics are, or what the globally most watched events are. And it's soccer, it's cricket, it's these types of things. I mean, the Super Bowl kind of cracks the top 20 internationally, but it's only because I think of it's the grandeur of the event. The problem, if you're in a lot of those other countries, you don't play football the way we play football. They don't have the pads, they don't have the coaches, they don't grow up with it. So, I mean, to them, it's truly not an international sport. But I think flag football, everybody can play flag football to a degree. And that starts people saying, okay, if I played flag football and that becomes an Olympic sport in 2028, and it grows, and we send the dream team out there, and it's Patrick Mahomes throwing to CeeDee Lamb, and everybody's studying, this recreates what happened in 1992 when the dream team played in Olympic basketball. Who knows what the next 30 years looks like for football? If all of a sudden now you're getting these guys that were quarterbacks and wide receivers in these other countries because, again, look at the NBA today. The last 5 MVPs were all foreign-born international players. So who's to say they can't get there? But that also helps the league grow and plant flags. And again, now if you're Netflix and all of a sudden NFL starts to do those kinds of numbers globally, you start to get a lot more interested in that package at the end of the day.
Yep. Understood.
Dr. Loftin, one more thing for you. We have always heard throughout the last couple of years in NIL stories about this player getting this or this school offering this and that. The Athletic had an interesting article that kind of delved in a little bit deeper and kind of got closer to the truth of how NIL is with not just student athletes, but with families.
Yeah, I would commend to anybody listening or watching this podcast to look at the most recent article I saw in the Athletic this week. It did a nice interview with players, with coaches, and other sports-related people about the portal and NIL. And I'll start with one quick story, and that is that now there are NIL deals being created with parents of athletes. So the athlete negotiates an NIL deal with a school, and the parents come and say, well, by the way, we live across the country. We'll need money to travel to watch our child play. We need to have some resources there too. And a separate NIL contract is then negotiated with the parents, called the parents contract. They appear at the game that their child plays in at the behest of the NIL sponsor. So think about that going forward, how that might expand the NIL universe a little more. And I'll just leave you with one quote here. I just love this. There were people talking in this particular article about the role of the portal now, how the portal's become such a different kind of world here. I'll read you one quick quote. Portal recruiting is actually like speed dating.
Yeah. I know one team in the SEC in basketball did all their transfers via Zoom, did not bring them in. Some schools are deciding to do that.
Save money anyway.
Yeah. But the speed dating is absolutely correct. And for some of them, you sit down for a minute, right? And you're gone. That's what some athletes do. Some sit at that table and stay for a while. That's also going to figure it out. The other thing that I thought about the portal, this is just me, with all these people, there's not enough chairs for all the people in the portal. There's going to be a lot of portal people who are going to be disappointed. But again, this is all going to take time. I totally get it. But like I said, that's for my next podcast, Unintended Consequences.
That's our new show for Netflix. Will be Portal U, Last Chance Portal U, and it's all these kids coming in, and we're doing a follow them as they try to figure out where their next stop's going to be.
Dr. Loftin, you realize every topic he brings up is how he can get his claws in and get a piece of that pie.
You call the man an entrepreneur, okay? An entrepreneur. That's what he is.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
I'm just an old retired guy, okay?
I have missed you guys. It was great to get back together. Let's do this
appreciate
again.
You being on the road
soon,
so much, my friend.
Right, you got a little time off
long
now.
Time, Andrew. Welcome
except
home.
for the College World Series.
I'm hoping there's a trip to Omaha in the future. No. You know, that's what I'm hoping.
It
is nice to be home, and then Hoover, and then back home again. Regional, we hope super regional, and then Omaha. But I'll make time for my friends. You know that. College Sports FTM at Gmail is our email for you. If you have a question for Dr. Loftin or for Jon Heidtke, we'd love to hear from you, and we will certainly answer that again. For our producer, Nick Savage. Nick, thank you very much. Welcome aboard. For Dr. Loftin, for Jon Heidtke, I'm Andrew Monaco. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you again soon on the next College Sports Follow the Money.